Hello, and welcome to We Can Work It Out, the podcast that explores the history, present, and future of workers' rights. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Lord. In each episode, we'll be delving into the stories, struggles, and successes that have shaped working lives. From friendly societies to people management, we welcome academics, activists, trade unionists, policymakers, and workers themselves to help us understand what fair work really means in a changing world. This episode's guest is Andrei Savitski, Community Research and Data Officer at the Works Rights Centre. Today's episode focuses on an institution that sits at the heart of workplace justice in Britain, the Employment Tribunal system. Employment tribunals were designed to provide accessible, relatively informal, and affordable justice for workers and employers. Yet in recent years, concerns have grown about rising caseloads, significant delays, regional disparities, and whether the system can continue to deliver timely access to justice. Andrei, whose work on the Employment Tribunals in Crisis reports, examines the pressures facing the tribunal system, the causes of growing backlogs, and what reforms may be necessary to ensure employment rights remain meaningful in practice. Andrei, welcome to We Can Work It Out.
Thanks so much for having me, Jonathan. Delighted to be here.
Good stuff. So before we look at the report that you've authored, can you tell us more about yourself and what your background is, please?
Absolutely. So I was actually originally from the US. I've got a background that is kind of Russian Ukrainian, and I've been in London for the last 9 years. Initially, I was trained as an economist, and actually the first couple of stints I did in the think tank and consulting space were in the economicsy kind of side of things. So I didn't get into employment, legal research, or the kind of stuff that this report focuses on until the last 3 years when I joined the Work Rights Centre. But before that, I did volunteer with the organization. So I had some experience on the casework side of things. And and that feeds a lot into the way that I've conducted research since. So we do in my research role on a day-to-day, we collaborate a lot with our caseworkers to see and just make sure that we understand how things, policies and policy decisions manifest in the day-to-day lives for our clients.
Okay, good stuff. That's a quite good, it's a really good introduction about how you've got into this, and I suppose you've been exposed to different things, which has helped you produce this report. So, in terms of this report that you've produced, Employment Tribunals in Crisis, what was the catalyst for producing it?
So there were a few things. The first is that as an organization, we are in quite a few different forums, both specific to, say, nonprofit organizations, but also those where various employment legal professionals, practitioners share their experiences. And time again, we kept on hearing that people were experiencing, rather out of the blue, huge delays in the tribunal system. So this is not just when a final hearing is listed, but this is at every single stage of the process. And that kind of went from hearsay to much more concrete reality for when we started noticing it amongst our own clients. So we had a few cases where final hearings or hearings were rescheduled to sometime in the future, and that time was made the whole process extend to years for the client to reach that final hearing. And at that point, we realized that we really should be doing something about this, so the issue's urgent, that it's not only urgent, but it's developing rapidly in kind of the more negative direction. So the waiting times kept on growing, and the kind of issues that we saw in tribunals kept on getting more frequent and worse amongst our own client base. And in November, or rather in October of last year, we started working on this report.
The title is quite stark, isn't it? What was your kind of purpose behind it? Was it to kind of make people realize the predicament that the system is in, or was it an accurate portrayal of what's happening in the system at the moment?
Well, when I was speaking to various practitioners and interviewing them, their experiences, some of them have been practicing employment law for as many as 30 years, and their experience was that there was never something like this. So we've never had it that some of the more complex cases were waiting 4 years for a final hearing, listed 4 years later, or that there were that many administrative errors where sensitive applications were not being responded to at all for months and months on end. And in that respect, I think it is reflective of the state of affairs. But the other side of things is that employment tribunals and access to employment justice don't generally get space in the media and the policy space. So they don't, in various conversations and discussions, you might hear more about, say, the criminal justice system. And understandably so and rightly so. It is also a system that is currently in crisis. But if I'm to put it this way, employment tribunals affect people in a different way. You don't normally focus on employment tribunals until it's too late, until you do have an employment dispute and an employment problem that you are seeking to resolve. Whereas something like criminal justice or the criminal justice system, you're thinking, oh, well, I want to make sure that I'm safe and my family is safe. So it's something that you're more likely to, just as the average person is more likely to take an interest in. And I think I was speaking with Emiliano Molino, a journalist at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and he was saying that the number of industrial relations reporters in the UK has gone down to, I think there's one kind of dedicated person who's a specialist in this, not just covering it from time to time, but a specialist who's covering these things. So in that respect, we did also want to make it something that kicks off a conversation and contributes to a conversation that gains some traction in both the media space and the policy space, and hopefully leads to some change.
In terms of a crisis, then, is it just the backlog? Is it funding? What would you kind of, if you could summarize what the crisis was, what would you say it primarily is?
So the crisis is, let's put it this way. So the way the crisis manifests is that we have long delays for kind of anything. So preliminary hearing, a final hearing, any kind of response from tribunal administrative staff. It also manifests in the sense that we have a lot of hearing postponements and cancellations. So on the administrative side, it seems that they can't handle the sheer volume of cases. And this is all driven by the fact, and we have seen this in the data, that the number of cases that the tribunal disposes of, so is able to handle and close in a year, is now grossly falling short of the number of cases it receives into the system. So the cases that enter. And each one, so that's how the backlog grows. And each one of these cases requires time and attention. At any point, someone could submit an application, a hearing might be needed, communication must be responded to, in addition to hearings that have been scheduled well in advance. So if I had to summarize, the system is not handling the volume of cases that is there. But at the same time, we don't believe this is an issue with the number of cases that are entering the system. So if we look historically, actually, the system is receiving far fewer cases than before LASPO 2012. So when employment was taken out of legal aid and when these were introduced in 2013. So say during the financial recession, 2009, 2010, there were as many as nearly 80,000 cases received in a single year. Whereas in 2024, 2025, it was fewer than 40,000. So like pretty much half. So the issue really is that we are unable to dispose of the cases. And I'm happy to kind of go into the drivers as well. And there's kind of multitude of drivers that are behind the system's inability to dispose of these cases in a timely manner.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to go into the actual data side if that's okay, and kind of drill down into that because it is interesting that when you track the tribunal figures, 2008, 2009, I know there was a bit of a peak, wasn't there, because of multiple claims, but they were up in the hundreds of thousands at one point, weren't they? Can you kind of drill down a bit more into the actual stats of the tribunal then and look at what exactly is driving the number of cases? Is it the legality of cases has made it more difficult to dispose of quickly? Can we start off with the kind of stats then around tribunals at the moment?
So, and this is we don't yet have. I think it'll actually be released potentially tomorrow. But in the first 3 quarters of last year, we had 37,000 case receipts and 19,000 cases were disposed of. So in just 3 quarters, we had 18,000 more cases being open, so kind of sitting there in the system. Even if we look at 2 years ago, so 2 years earlier, that would have been 2023, 2024, the number of cases that entered kind of caused the backlog to grow was 5,000. So there were 5,000 fewer disposals than receipts. So within just a span of 2 years, it's kind of a 3 times worse how should I say, ability to dispose of cases relative to the number of cases received. And I think what we found is that there are a few driving factors. The first being that there are just judicial resourcing issues. So if we look at certain regions, and in particular, this is London, they're just unable to recruit and then retain the judicial resource that is necessary to deal with the incoming cases and the open caseload. That's the first thing. And as an example, number of open cases per full-time equivalent judge in Wales, as of April 2025, was 113, so 113 cases per judge. In London, taking the 3 London regions together, it was 498. The differences are stark. So there is clear regional dimension to this. Then there is another factor. So we have judicial issues, judicial resourcing issues, but there's also the administrative side. Are we able to handle communications, make sure judges actually see all the evidence before a hearing, those kinds of things? And clearly there's an administrative problem as well because the number of cases, so once again, case volume per administrator who is salaried in the system, has grown from 82 in 2022 to 160. So pretty much a doubling as of 2025. So there is a question, and we couldn't answer this question in a lot of detail, but whether there is sufficient admin resource, whether people are just like joining and leaving because many administrators work on temporary contracts with very low pay, or whether there's something else at play here that goes beyond just pure staffing, and it's about kind of the technical side of the administration of tribunals. And the third thing is an increase in case complexity, which you touched upon just earlier. We're definitely seeing an increase in the complexity of cases. So to give some examples, in just 12 months and I'm going to convert this into months and years, but September 2024 to September 2025. No, December 2024 to December 2025, there's a 99% increase in disability discrimination claims received. This is from single cases. 70% increase in race discrimination claims and 102% increase in public interest disclosure. So whistleblowing detriment mostly claims. This is, and I would want to emphasize this. This is not to say that suddenly people are realizing they can go to the tribunal and put in any claim they wish and take it there. And we know say, from the Working Lives Survey, which is a study that was conducted by UCL recently, that the scale of various infringements is very high, both amongst non-precarious and precarious workers. So there are a lot of labor rights infringements, but this could be driven, for example, and we think this is definitely be the case, and so does, say, the president of Employment Tribunals, and some of his meetings has said this, that people are finding out about their rights through artificial intelligence, through online searches, whereas before, in a, I would say, pre-COVID kind of digital, but in a way pre-digital world in the way we know it today, people wouldn't find out that they may have certain claims unless they went to a law centre or citizens' advice, or were advised by a trade union, or whatever else it may be, wherever else they may have sought advice before. Whereas now there is an accessibility of, I wouldn't call it advice, but information online, which pushes people to question some of their workplace conditions and the way they were treated. Some of these claims will be meritorious, some will not. Some may actually be meritorious, they're just really badly pleaded because people can't access very expensive legal representation. But at the end of the day, the system does have more of these complex cases, and it's just unable to deal with them. If I may, there's just one more thing, and that is sitting days. And this doesn't get as much attention, perhaps, as some of the other factors about, say, recruitment of judges. However, we think it's extremely important because judges can only sit in the tribunal as many days as they are paid to do so by MOJ. So each year, MOJ allocates a certain number of sitting days, and that's distributed then across the various regions. So it's done on a regional basis. It's also done on a centralized basis. And you would expect that the number of sitting days that are allocated would fully utilize all the judicial resource that's available so that we can sit as many days as possible. But we question this, and the reason we question this, for example, is that the number of sittings done by fee-paid judges, so the contracted judges, has fallen by 21% in just 2 years to April 2025. That's one thing. Another thing is that the number of sitting days allocated for this year is lower than last year, which is lower than the year before. And that is despite a recruitment exercise for salaried judges, the largest recruitment exercise ever in recent history, taking place to bring more judges into the system. So we anticipate having more judicial resource, but we're having the lowest number of sitting days in 3 years. And without the sitting days, you just can't have hearings which then clear the system subsequently, or you can't list cases close enough in the future where parties are then encouraged to prepare to potentially have settlement negotiations to do whatever else they need to do. So this is a big problem, we think. At the moment, judges are utilizing about 95% of their sitting days are allocated, and there will always be some discrepancy because, a judge might fall sick at the last moment, sitting day not utilized. But they're utilizing 95% of them. There's no indication from the Secretary of State, David Lammy, that there will be additional allocations for this year for any of the subsequent years that will be sufficient to have enough hearings to actually start clearing the system. So even if we had 1,000 more judges, it wouldn't do us much good. We need to have sitting days as well. And that's probably the fourth driver here. That was quite a lot, but happy to answer any questions around that as well.
No, it's a really good background because I don't think people, when you see the headlines, it's always there's a backlog, and until this report, really, I know there's been previous research. I've done some research on tribunals previously, and I don't think the wealth of information you've got in this report is fantastic because it really drills down on what the problems are. When you talked about the judges, of course, when tribunals were set up, it was a tripartite arrangement. You had 2 lay members and then a judge. Now you've got a judge sitting alone. I'm presuming in the majority of cases now, So with the decrease in number of, or not as many cases going to tribunal, with only one judge sitting rather than having three on the panel, it's strange why there is a backlog, and it's good that the information you're getting out there really drills down and pinpoints what the problem is about these sitting days. Do you think there is an issue around lay members not sitting? Has it caused any problems, do you think? Do you may think it's eased up or freed things? Do you think it's delayed cases because those lay members were trying to get to the heart of the problem and help judges understand what the real world is? And I remember Lord Wedderburn, he gave a great presentation or a speech before he passed away, and he advocated you have to have this tripart arrangement. You have to have the three-member panel because the judge knows the law, the two lay members will know the workplace, and it can actually quicken the process up rather than focus too much on the law. You can get to the facts of the case and the truth and then make a decision sometimes a bit quicker. So I know it's a bit of a hypothetical question, but do you think the lack of lay members has impacted the tribunal system at all?
Interestingly enough, at the last Tribunal National User Group meeting that we attended in March, the president stated his intention to recruit more lay members. So there will be a recruitment exercise for them, or at least there's one planned. And I guess there's some agreement possibly around that. Now, the other side of the story, and usually just for context, in our cases, kind of even the more complex ones, are normally, for example, discrimination cases tend to have a panel, or at least tended to. We sometimes almost ask for there to be no panel in the current state of affairs, and that's because, for instance, if a case is part heard, or if you have this last minute postponement, which is not uncommon in kind of given how capacity is at the moment, it means you would need to find another date when all three people, so the judge and the two non-legal members, would be available to keep consistency, and that might push the next hearing back. Well, however far back it will push it. So, in a very perverse way, even where it could be beneficial, sometimes a party might make a request not to have the panel, just to ensure that if there is that postponement or cancellation or whatever, that this follow-up hearing takes place as soon as possible. And yeah, that's just unfortunate. I think we don't have very strong views on this, and I think partly, and this is kind of the other side of things, partly it's because most cases end up getting settled or withdrawn. With a small minority, I think about on average 10% for single cases reaching a final hearing, and a very, very small fraction being struck out or having some other kind of outcome like that. And this is in quarterly tribunal statistics, which are published online. So in reality, the most important thing in a way is when these these final hearings are scheduled. So if that is in 2020, early 2027, so say 6 months away, that means you will have orders. You will need to get that evidence ready, so for disclosure, so to exchange that and collate that between the parties. You will have to exchange witness statements. You will have to prepare for the hearing within a relatively reasonable short time frame. That focuses the parties' minds on kind of the evidence and witness statements they see. It pushes them towards settlement negotiations, which is how most cases resolve. But then if that hearing, whether you have the panel or not, is scheduled for 2029, then those conversations don't even start, those settlement negotiations, preparation won't even start happening until whenever that is. Or if it does, if witness statements are exchanged really early on, the respondent usually might just wait until the end and see if the claimant drops out. So I think there's a different conversation maybe to be had, and I wouldn't want to necessarily state that we have a strong view on this, and that conversation would take place when there are reasonable hearing times, basically. But with the current state of affairs, it might not make too much of a difference, given that at the end of the day, most of these cases are settled or the claimant withdraws their claims.
I remember reading a report, it was a long time ago, and it said that it was for employers, it was cheaper to settle than it was to go to tribunal. Did you find any evidence of that within your report or with your research?
Well, this is also the thing. We did speak to practitioners, some of whom had experience representing primarily respondents, or who exclusively work with respondents, in fact. And a lot of the findings relate to both claimants and respondents. So there's two sides. The first side is that it may be, in certain cases, cheaper to wait out, just given either because of the size of the claim, or so the valuation, or because the claimant in question is so entrenched and feels so strongly that they want to keep pursuing this, at least for the time in the moment, for the time being. And the respondent wants to kind of assess the seriousness of their intentions. Are they going to go to the end? That's one thing. The second thing is that settlement negotiate and in this to provide more context, oftentimes, at least once again in our experience and those of interviewees, settlement negotiations rarely happen before the preliminary hearing, unless it's kind of a very obvious breach where the respondent was just waiting for the claim to go in, and that's because the judge at the preliminary hearing might strike something out. There might be a deposit order. The respondent might put an application for strikeout, and that might narrow down the claims and also reduce the valuation of the claim, kind of, and what the claimant might think is reasonable, because some of the claims are just gone. So if you don't have a preliminary hearing for over a year, and that's a reality, I think I saw something like 18 months in London South, then you don't have an incentive as a respondent to settle. Well, and then but then there's the flip side. And the flip side is that, especially with complex cases, which might have multiple hearings before you even reach a final hearing, and then once you get to a final hearing, you will have multiple final hearings as well. It will be really, really long. Each day is legal costs. And I think that argument 100% stands, that when you have a 15-day hearing and it's just a single claimant, you're thinking, well, it makes sense for me just to settle, because this is insane. I'm going to incur so much in legal costs. In addition, what I've already paid to date just to prepare the response and prepare for the preliminary hearing, any ADR that happened. So any like judicial mediation or whatever may have taken place before. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot on respondents as well.
In your report, you highlight administration as being one of the issues. And when you look at some of the recommendations, which I know we'll come on to later, with that freedom of information request that you did, it was fascinating and disturbing to find out some of the workloads were doubled. You know, the caseloads were doubled, weren't they, for some of the administrators? And I mean, it's quite obvious that's going to have an impact. Did you find any information about how they justified that, why they were doing that, why it was acceptable? What was the kind of reason why you wanted to find that out, and what were the reasons for it was?
I think this is where the work right centers experience comes into play, because we had, just to give some very rapid fire examples, we had one case where we chased a judgment. We were supposed to get written judgment. 2 years, nothing, just gave up. Another case where an application was submitted, we got a response 8 months later, and it was time sensitive, and it just had no value by then. So I think that was a strikeout application. Just completely didn't get any response, um, and that made the team think that it's more than just, you know, what's going on the judicial side. Something's also wrong on the administrative side, and to be fair, some steps have been taken. So there's a centralized telephony system. Uh, there is now the online MyHMCTS system portal for not everyone. So, for instance, litigants in person can't use it, but for most service users, and these I can't really speak on it. I think it's probably going to be assessed or is being assessed as we speak. But I imagine this has had some positive impact, but not enough to stop the types of things that we were seeing. And another thing, and this is well documented, so it was previously said by HMCTS, that when fees were introduced in the tribunal system, number of claims went down dramatically. So people were prevented, especially people on lower incomes or who became unemployed as a result of their issue, understandably so, dismissed or made redundant. They would just wouldn't bring claims. They wouldn't pay the fee. And that result, because the caseload went down, the amount of judicial resource decreased, the amount of funding decreased, and the number of administrators decreased. And you had very experienced administrators in the system, which was repeated to me by many practitioners who worked for decades kind of in employment law and who had that experience where people they would see year after year responding to their emails who really knew rules and procedure, they knew the law, they were in effect, even though administrative roles are sometimes wrongly considered lower skilled, they were very skilled and very knowledgeable. They had institutional knowledge, as one interviewee put it. And when they were not needed because the number of cases went down, they all left their jobs. And then after fees were abolished and caseload went up back to what I would call even low levels, but call them normal levels, judges were recruited frantically, but it's unclear what happened with administrative recruitment and who was recruited and on what terms, and whether that institutional knowledge, the knowledge how to deal with certain cases, which cases, whether rules and procedure were being followed, those kinds of things, how to respond to people, what to bring to the judge's attention immediately. Maybe it's that knowledge that was lost. And I shared just one advertisement in the report, which I found, because I couldn't find a job spec anywhere. But the advertisement, which contains the job spec, effectively shows that there is a 3-month temporary contract, potentially extended, potentially not, at a rate just above the national living wage. And this is in Bristol, which has a high cost of living. So you can imagine that somewhere like Bristol or London is really difficult to try and get to recruit someone and then retain them to help them build up the institutional knowledge necessary to run things smoothly and efficiently. And I think the report asks the question, we hypothesize, but there needs to be some kind of audit done internally as to whether there is a problem there and what is necessary to address it, and to what extent this could be part of the solution, really.
I remember looking at the stats for when tribunal fees were introduced and then when they were kind of rescinded because of the court case. And I remember describing it like a cliff face. You could see the drop off. It was literally like when you do one of those graphs, it was literally a cliff face. And sometimes some of the jurisdictions had a 75% decrease in the number of claims. So it was bound to impact, obviously, people going to the tribunal system because they couldn't afford it. But again, this is what your report, I think, is great. It highlights some of the deeper issues about that. The introduced fees, which means they then got money for administrating the tribunal system. but the number of cases dramatically dropped. So therefore, the amount of cases that were being heard were not as much, and therefore he didn't have as much money probably anticipated as well. So it's fascinating that you've looked at it in that way. In terms of the tribunal system, then, and you kind of refer to this in your report. Has there been a reduction in faith in this legal system being just?
We worry, and one interviewee called this a demonstration effect. We worry that people are just going to be put off from bringing claims. And as an advice organization, where we have, solicitors who must act in the best interest of our clients, it would be we can't not tell people of what this process looks like, especially if they're in certain places like in London, or maybe Watford Tribunal is another one with really long delays, or East Midlands for longer cases that are listed for longer number of days. We have to tell people, and it may put people off. And if it doesn't put people off, it may mean that they accept a lower settlement, far lower than what they may have been awarded had the case reached a final hearing. So I think I can't really see a case yet. I'm trying to think if we had one. I don't think we did, but I'm sure that this is a very real issue, and this is one of the reasons that we want this addressed so urgently, especially, and this is more on the government side, but especially if they want the plan to make work pay to work. Because if you have a lot of new protections and workers have a lot of new rights, but they're unenforceable in practice, or the amount of compensation you can get is far below what is just, then that reform has failed, even though we think that on the whole it is an achievement of this government. But it won't be if people can't enforce these rights.
Yeah, and the Employment Rights Act has obviously come in and will come in over the next year or so as well. You've got the Fair Work Agency. Have the government have said that? Because there's bound to be an increase. It's logical, isn't it? You introduce more employment legislation to protect workers' rights. It's logical that there's going to be more claims. Have the government intimated or said how what the predictions are for the tribunal caseloads, and whether they're going to put extra funding in for that? Have they correlated those two things together at all?
Well, I think that's the problem, because there was an assessment done in January, which predicted an extra 6,900 tribunal cases per year, which, if we look at 2024, 2025 annual data, that corresponds to an 18% increase in annual case receipts. We and others think that is an underestimate. So extension of tribunal time limits. So presently you have 3 months to bring a tribunal claim in most cases, unless you're able to bring it out of time, which is really rare. That is being extended to 6 months. So you have 6 months as the baseline, and that is from October 2026. So that alone, I can't even describe how many people fall foul of that limitation period. We have a lot of cases where we have to turn people away, where they might actually have a good claim, but it is completely out of time, and there's no way to argue that discretion should be exercised. All these people will be able to bring a claim, and that's without any new rights coming into effect. And then the rest depends on what some of the regulations will look like, because the assessment was done on the basis of relatively old data. Some of it was 2023 data, and on that basis, we figured out this 6,900 extra cases per year figure. But I suspect that the picture has changed since 2023 as well. There's been an increase in cases brought, especially more complex cases. Once again, people are finding out about their rights. There is potentially a shift, or there might be a better assessment of the number of people who are in say, flexible work, whether flexible work or 0 hours contract work where those new protections come into effect. So that's something that's changed potentially. And I would say it's very unlikely, but realistically needs a reassessment, especially once regulations come in and we actually know what the Employment Rights Act looks like in it, in its full form. Just to give maybe a final example of that, uh, the and we were discussing this as a team, the protections, or rather the right to hours of work that reflect true hours worked. So this guaranteed hours part of the act is being consulted on, and it is incredibly complex. I forget who said it. I want to say maybe Darren Newman said that it was one of the most complex things that's in any like employment legislation in ever. And the potential gain for workers is loss of income, which if it's like shift work or it's a single shift is almost nothing. So something like that, as it presently stands, might not bring any claims, even though it's predicted to bring quite a few, according to that assessment. So that's kind of the flip side, is that some of these things might be absolutely toothless because they're very complex, but actually, in theory, give workers very little compensation. So the juice is not worth the squeeze. Um, but that once again points to there needs to be a reassessment, more up-to-date figures, better understanding of how people engage with the tribunal system, um, and yeah, recalculation. Because if that figure is not 6,900 but 13,000, that's double. That's already double, and yeah, the system can't cope with that.
And we did some research a few years ago, and it was a conference paper, but we analysed the likely chance of success at a tribunal, and we
Mm,
analysed. I'll ask you about tribunal stats in a moment, what you think about them. Um, but we found out that the London area, so we grouped them together, were the worst, the least chance of success, and Newcastle was the Newcastle area, the northeast, was the greatest chance of success, and redundancy, I think, was the greatest chance of success as well as the jurisdiction. So it's amazing, you talked about the regional differences before. It is amazing, really, how different they are. And I know we tried to analyse why there were differences, but it was too difficult. We blame judges, we blame the economics of the area, we blame the industries, but it was so difficult to kind of pinpoint why there's such a regional difference. What about employment tribunal statistics? Because I monitor them as well, and the last couple of years they've had a new system, haven't they, put in place? So it's really confused from my perspective, anyway. And I'm not a stats man, but how do you get on analysing the tribunal statistics? And do you think they're accurate? Do you think they portray what's really going on? And how difficult is it getting access to the information as well?
yeah, I mean, I completely empathize. I mean, that that'd be such a useful piece of work, to also just be redone now, given the current state of affairs, and just see what the different odds of success are in different areas and what could be contributing factors. But as you say, the quality of the data is not very good. And that's partly why we're able to present very general, um, big picture types of findings, which are quantitative. I think sometimes we got regional level or employment tribunal level data through FOIs, but even then there was only so much we could say, and that's partly why we did the interviews alongside it. Um, I'd also say that we're finally getting, and this is more positive news, we're getting two great sources of data hopefully this year. The first being the survey of employment tribunal applications, which wasn't done since 2016-17. It was published in 2018 last time, and it did give um, a regression analysis for odds of success, controlling for various factors, including representation, certain protected characteristics. This is it, I mean, there's nothing that can replace that kind of research, and it will be published. I believe last I heard, the plan was to publish it towards the end of this year, and really looking forward to that. The second bit was as part of the Access to Justice research series that MOJ was doing. Uh, they're now doing one on employment tribunals that's been in the works, and I believe that's going to be an assessment is going to be published this year, and that follows all single. And once again, I hope I'm not getting this wrong from the one meeting I attended, but I believe this is all single claims are being followed um, from a particular point in time. I think after the reform system was introduced through early 2026, maybe, and they're going to look at outcomes and how the journeys of these claims through the system controlling for a whole load of things, including things such as protected characteristics, once again, representation, and potentially more. I don't know where they got there, but I did ask. I was like pretty insistent on things like industry and occupation, which are optional fields in the ET1 form, so in the claim form, but would give us a much better picture for the types of for the type of analysis that you and your team wanted to do. So hopefully that gives us some kind of good data that can then be analyzed and give rise to this kind of research.
Yeah, okay. So that'd be the survey of employment tribunals would be fantastic to get that updated information. Just drawing your report to a conclusion, then, do you mind just going through what some of the recommendations were within the report? Because obviously you've presented a lot of information, a lot of problems, a lot of issues with tribunals. What were the kind of essence of the recommendations that you've found or proposed?
First, I was going to say twofold and threefold and fourfold, but it is fourfold, and that's how our report is structured. And I think there's no way of simplifying it. But I think there's a good mix of stuff that is aspirational, stuff that just requires an injection of funds, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a large amount for some of this, especially given potential savings to the system, which are often excluded from analysis and from policy conversations. We forget how much can be saved. Um, but to start, it's a better resourced judiciary. So that is both more sitting days. So an assessment of, we have X judges who can sit this many days in various regions across in England and Wales. Can we increase the number of sitting days and actually utilize that amount, and what impact would that have on listings? I think that's an assessment that needs to be done, and that is something that hasn't been done yet that we're advocating for. Then it is about using fee paid judges across regions more, and this is a good practice that's already being done actually through a virtual region. So you have regions that are better able to handle their capacity. And for example, that's the Northeast, so somewhere like Newcastle, and judges from there can be used to sit remotely. So if it's by video conferencing, um, they can sit remotely somewhere like London and hear cases in a different region and support the London region. So a virtual region has been used, but it's only up to 2,000 sittings a year. We think there is scope to expand that. We're very pleased to see that last week's presidential guidance showed a shift to more hearings by video conference. So all preliminary hearings, fast track final hearings. It was also strikeout, deposit order, cost hearings, interim relief hearings. That's all going online as a default. And that makes it much easier to use a virtual region and have judges somewhere up, say from up north or from Wales, sit in regions that are struggling. So that's one thing. The other is like about case management and administration. So it's what I said about admin staff, just assessing the recruitment and retention and improving their terms and conditions enough so that you're actually able to retain people, recruit people and then retain them and train them up and build up institutional knowledge, and you will have efficiency gains that way. It's also about having standardized directions instead of case management preliminary hearings, we think case management preliminary hearings are necessary. There are definitely circumstances where they are, but there's also a lot of circumstances where they're not, and they can be a drain. Um, Firmer case management, and this is not just on respondents, but also on represented claimants who um, behave either vexatiously or fail to comply with deadlines, fail to comply with orders, and don't agree anything with the other party, and just behave in a way that we can do anything because the tribunal's too busy sorting with other cases, and this has real implications. So tribunals getting stuff last minute, just unprepared parties and whatnot. So tougher action on that. We think also that the whole system is not friendly for litigants in person. So if you're not represented, you have a very jargon heavy claim form to fill in. You're not supported with laying out your facts in a way that enables a judge or a respondent's representative to actually look at what your case is about. We've had interviewees as part of this research who said, we get claim forms, we don't even know what they're about. We don't know what claim is being made. Sometimes it just says discrimination. And what are you supposed to do with that? You can't apply for a strikeout because you don't know what the claim is about either. So it's a mess, and we think there needs to be some user research done to reform the ET1 claim form, make it friendly for litigants in person, and the same for exploring basically AI to help people prepare schedules of loss. We think there's some research that can be done around that. And finally, early intervention, and we haven't really touched on this, but the first thing is using alternative dispute resolution methods, and we think the small claims system in the county courts can be expanded to fast track cases in employment tribunals, where you have non-judicial, so not led by a judge, but mediation that happens ASAP, and you get either parties take part, and it's oftentimes very straightforward. You paid or you didn't, or the other party just doesn't engage, and you can start enforcement proceedings or get a judgment by default much, much earlier, as opposed to waiting and waiting and waiting, and then suddenly, oh, well, the party's not responded and they've already gone insolvent. So that's one thing. We think dispute resolution appointments which are mandatory and give a judge's base opinion perspective on the prospects of success, that's really helpful. We think it should be expanded. And for instance, cutting on the case management preliminary hearings gives some judicial time and resource to do this. It can also be done by judges who are based anywhere. This is not in person. This happens online, and it doesn't have to be judges from within a particular region who conduct this. And finally, legal advice for employment. If claimants' minds can be focused on the strongest claims that they have instead of all 15 that AI told them that they can bring, that'd be super beneficial. And it's not, the thing here is, it isn't the claimant's fault. They can't navigate such a complex area of law on their own. And instead, it's up to government to realize that there are savings to the system. I think Access to Justice Foundation did some research in 2024, which found 400, just over 400 to 500 pounds per case is how much it costs to provide employment legal assistance to someone. But to the system at the time, it costs £2,400 for a single case to manage it, to pay staff to do their job to manage this case. So the savings are there. If this can be targeted, this doesn't have to take the form of legal aid. There needs to be some thinking about this. We don't have to recreate what was done previously. And this can be specific to certain aspects of the process, such as pre-litigation advice or quick one-off advice as opposed to representation. It kind of depends. But even, and we heard this from, once again, all sorts of practitioners, even a quick half an hour session with someone to focus their minds and tell them one-on-one that, you told me this is just, you just do not have a claim. You said you complained about something because you wanted to, I don't know, because you felt you wanted to call someone out for something just because it meant something personally to you. That's not whistleblowing. That's not in the public interest. Sometimes something as simple as that really focuses people's minds, and it has tremendous value. And we stand firmly behind better legal advice provision and better funding for legal advice as well.
I remember when you did the report launch, I asked the question and Lord Hendy came back pretty quickly because asked the question: is it too legal? Um, Professor Susan Corby called it the jurification of
Mm,
the tribunal system. It's got too legalistic, and it used to be about the truth. It used to be about what happened and the facts of the case, and did employers react reasonably? But I think it's a natural progression, isn't it? When the law comes in, it becomes more complex. There are more decisions made which are binding. Lord Hendy was more. He said basically that you couldn't like, kind of roll back that law. It's too difficult to do, which I think you could do. But obviously, he's far more superior in that knowledge. But he also mentioned about sectorial bargaining and having more trade union involvement, which could then prevent more tribunal claims being made. So, alternative dispute resolution through trade unions is definitely possibly a way forward to try and reduce the number of claims. Do you think that is, trade unions could have that input and could influence the number of claims being made?
we we actually are very interested to hear what trade unions have to say on this issue, because we definitely think they have a role to play. Um, and even though trade unions cover only a certain share of the overall workforce, they definitely do have a significant presence in particular sectors of the economy. And within those sectors, um, we think there is scope for things such as fair pay agreements. There is one that will be in adult social care as part of the Employment Rights Act, and that's going to take some time to roll out. Uh, there is also appetite, at least among certain people. So, for instance, Resolution Foundation published a report recently, um, and they were advocating for warehousing and I want to say hospitality to also have fair pay agreements where it simplifies things. You're supposed to get paid. These are the terms in in this sector. These are the minimum permissible terms, and employers have to abide by them. That's what has been reached. It does simplify things, and that's where trade unions have a role to play. I'm sure there's other things as well where trade unions can play a greater role, but I would be almost as a starting point, it'd be interesting to hear what they have to say because at least we we follow kind of what's being said in the public kind of media space. And we haven't heard too much yet, but I'm sure it's just kind of a matter of time before we hear their perspective as well on this issue because it does affect their members.
We've got two final questions, which we ask every guest. So we'll put you on the spot with those in a moment. But I must say the report is fantastic. It's well researched. Again, Lord Hendy mentioned that in the launch of it. Very well researched, very pertinent at the moment. And I think you've got the best interests of the tribunal system at the heart of it as well, and workers' rights. To improve it, make sure people are aware of the rights and have their rights upheld, but also provide a framework for employers, which gets lost sometimes. Employers want and need a framework to operate in to know how they can handle the employment relationship. And I think with this report and your recommendations, I think you've managed to do that, which is really good. So we'll put a link in, obviously, for the listeners to access the report. The first to the final question is what you're working on next.
Well, yeah, first of all, thank you yeah, for your kind words. We hope it's just a starting point. We know that we're lucky enough where we do have a research arm to our organization, but that there are many other organizations, um, trade unions, practitioners who uh, share at least some of our feelings and views on this issue. We do want to go next, both move on in terms of advocacy, So have a think about what is most feasible and achievable, and focus our minds on, yes, there are things in the long term that are more structural reform based, or say even judicial recruitment exercises, but there are also things that are short term that can be done, um, such as where it concerns rules and procedure, how things operate day to day basis, amending the ET1 form. Those kind of things can be done in the short term. So we just need to think what this is that we want to focus on, and take the next steps. And in terms of research, I think there are two issues which interest us, and I think one is around worker status, which gets lost sometimes, not always. There are people like Lord John Hendy who do speak about this a lot, who have done a lot of work on this and even drafted a bill. Um, but if the system works the way it does with employment tribunals, and if there are dozens of new rights that workers gain, which are very complex, many employers will be incentivized to let go of staff and contract out, whether lawfully or treating people as falsely self employed. It's a real risk. It affects, it can easily, there's no estimate for how many people this affects. And it's unclear what exact solution we would support here. I think single worker status is kind of the easy thing. So treat employees and workers the same. LIMBY workers, so like agency workers, temporary workers. But that doesn't get rid of the false self-employment issue either. So there's something to think about there, and it's very time sensitive given that employers will have to comply with Employment Rights Act provisions very soon once all these big things like unfair dismissal comes in, unfair dismissal, so the 6-month um, qualifying period instead of the 2-year qualifying period, that comes into effect 1st of January 2027. And yeah, we just fear people are going to be let go and work's going to start getting contracted out. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is enforcement of tribunal awards and settlements, because once again, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism did a report which found that most awards do not get paid. And oftentimes it is the more vulnerable service users, workers who face these issues, whether it's because a company is genuinely insolvent by the time a judgment comes about, so 2 years down the line. Somewhere like construction, that's really normal. Companies go insolvent all the time. Or can be because of asset dissipation, phoenixing, sometimes lawful activity that is just crooked. And the system enables this kind of behavior. People don't get their awards and access to justice is denied. So that's the other thing we want to focus on in more depth. It has been reported on, but we want to also look at things like international best practice and where to take this forward in practical terms. Sure, there's an issue, but how do we really approach this in terms of solutions? So these are the two things we're looking at. And by the way, really happy to speak with literally anyone. If there's anyone among the listeners who's interested in this topic, super happy to speak on this because, really relevant issue and really recent context, which hasn't had much addressing.
Yeah, the first thing about workers' right and the employment status is, even now there's been big discussions about it, and there's been big court cases, Uber and Deliveroo, massive cases, and it's still an issue now. It's incredible, really, that the government haven't tried to kind of address what the problems are. And the tribunal fees, it's been a scandal for a long time. That I know it's a scandal they're not being able to enforce the fees. Really, I remember taking the students to go and observe a tribunal once, and one company was a cleaning company, which was a commercial cleaning company, and it shut down, and it set up as a residential cleaning company with exactly the same name. So he wasn't made redundant. He wasn't cheaped over. You can see it's a big scam. There's always a scam going on, and the witness, who's the owner of the company, he was very arrogant, and he actually said to the judge, "You can award him whatever you want. I'm just going to shut the company down, and therefore you won't have a company to sue." And he actually told the judge that, and there's literally nothing you can do about it.
And it's amazing just how pervasive this is. And we see it, well, as you say, in cleaning, this kind of attitude by, I want to say unscrupulous employers, just to clarify, not all of them are like that, but there's enough. And we see this in construction time and time again, in hospitality. And there's been coverage of, I think it was a hospitality case where the management was done by 3 different companies. So I think paying staff from one, like contracting out from another, um, just completely avoiding any liability. So it's absolutely pervasive.
Okay, the last question, we're going to put you on the spot with this one. We ask everyone to choose one person or a group or an event which you believe has influenced the world of work. And what would that person, group, or event be, and why?
Oof. That is a good one. I mean, as Work Rights Centre, we're an organisation that supports everyone, so both British workers, migrant workers, across sectors and industries, those who can't basically afford legal support and legal advice. However, we do have a disproportionately high share of sponsored migrant workers amongst our service users. So people who come on work visas to the UK through legal channels, and they are tied to their employer. They cannot work for anyone else full time. That is the only employer they can do this for. And their right to be in the UK is tied to that employer. And the levels of exploitation of the scheme, because people are tied, have been astronomical. So this has been reported almost everywhere: BBC, Guardian, Financial Times, Bloomberg, wherever you look, this has been reported on in depth. But it's an ongoing issue to this day. And the reason this whole system came about is because of Brexit. So if I had to pick an event, it would be Brexit. And most of the time people think about it in economic terms or in freedom of movement terms, but we think about it in terms of this work sponsorship system, where before, especially for temporary roles or lower paid roles, or um, even higher paid roles, you would have EU, EEA to be precise, but yeah, EU nationals and their family members who could come here visa free, work for anyone. That enabled, professional mobility. It prevented exploitation. It gave people the right to switch jobs. And it's because of Brexit and the workplace shortages we had at the time, especially at the height of COVID and, say, the care sector, that we introduced the sponsorship system. And if not for Brexit, we wouldn't have had these disastrous levels of labor exploitation that we've been observing in recent years. And maybe for context for people, just to understand the scale of the issue, 0 hours contracts get a lot of attention. And there, I believe, and I may be wrong, but last I looked at ONS data, it was about 1 to 1.5 million people were on 0 hours contracts. There are, I want to say, 800,000 people on skilled worker visas. And that's just one type of sponsored work visas alone in the UK. And if I'm to be really precise, what I'm going to do is pull up the number here, and you can see, what I can see is that we have actually more than a million people as of December 2025, whether the main worker, the sponsored tied worker themselves or their family members, on these types of visas, where their right to be in the UK and right to work restricted by the immigration system, which happened because of Brexit. So that's the scale of what we're dealing with. It's as big as 0 hours contracts, but it still hasn't been addressed yet at all by this or the previous government. So yeah, Brexit. That's what I'd like to highlight.
Okay, that's the first time we've had Brexit. We've had COVID, which was an event, obviously, as well, which was a catalyst for a change in work, mainly working from home. But, I agree. I think Brexit doesn't get attention enough about the change in working practices and the type of people that are able to come and work in the UK and have the rights. So that's a good choice. Okay, well, it's been a fascinating discussion, Andre. I've really enjoyed it. It's something that I'm really interested in from a research perspective. I really did find your report a fantastic piece of work. So congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
we'll look forward to the future reports and work that you produce in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, hope listeners found this really insightful.
I'm sure they did. Andrei Savitski, thank you for joining us on We Can Work It Out.
Thank you.